Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah, and I need to share something with you that I never thought I'd have the courage to talk about publicly. But if my story can help even one person who's going through something similar, then it's worth it. 3 years ago, on what started as an ordinary Tuesday morning, my entire world collapsed. My husband, Michael, the love of my life, my best friend, the father of our 8-year-old daughter, Emma, died suddenly of a heart attack at just 34 years old. He was in a client meeting at his financial advisory firm when it happened. One moment he was presenting investment plans, helping families secure their futures, and the next, he was gone. That morning had been so perfectly normal it almost feels cruel now. Michael made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs for Emma while I packed her lunch. He kissed us both goodbye, promised to be home early for Emma's school art show, and his last words to me were, "Don't forget to pick up more maple syrup, the real stuff, not that corn syrup garbage." Such a mundane final conversation that I replay in my head constantly. At 10:47 a.m., his assistant Jennifer called me. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Sarah, Michael collapsed during the client meeting. The ambulance is here. They're taking him to Northwestern Memorial." I remember dropping my coffee mug. The sound of ceramic shattering on tile still echoes in my memory. I called our neighbor Ellen to pick up Emma from school, then drove to the hospital, breaking every speed limit, praying the entire way, bargaining with God in desperate whispers. But I was too late. Michael was pronounced dead at 11:23 a.m., just minutes before I arrived. Massive heart attack, they said. Nothing could have been done, they assured me, as if that made it better somehow. The hardest part wasn't even seeing Michael's body lying there so still. It was driving home knowing I had to tell Emma that her daddy, the man who made dinosaur pancakes that very morning, was never coming home again. How do you explain death to an 8-year-old? How do you tell her that the daddy who promised to come to her art show that night was gone forever? When Emma got in my car after school, she immediately sensed something was wrong. "Where's Daddy? He promised to come to my art show tonight," she said, clutching her backpack. I had to pull over because I couldn't focus on driving. "Emma, something very sad happened today. Daddy got very sick at work and his heart stopped working." Her face scrunched in confusion. "Can the doctors fix it?" The innocent hope in her question broke something inside me. "No, sweetie, when someone's heart stops working completely, the doctors can't fix it. Daddy died today." She stared at me for what felt like an eternity, her blue eyes so much like Michael's, processing this incomprehensible information. Then she asked, "Does that mean Daddy isn't coming home ever?" When I nodded, unable to speak through my tears, she let out a wail that didn't sound human. It was primal, the pure sound of a child's heart breaking. That evening, after I'd finally gotten Emma to sleep in my bed, clutching Michael's unwashed t-shirt for comfort, the full weight of my loss hit me. I sat on the bathroom floor with the door closed so Emma wouldn't hear, and I broke down completely. The physical pain of grief was overwhelming, like being repeatedly punched in the chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I needed my mom and dad. With shaking hands, I called my parents. They'd been married for 40 years, had weathered losses together. Surely they would know what to say, how to help me through this impossible time. My mother answered on the 5th ring, and I could hear laughter and music in the background. "Mom," I choked out, barely able to form words through my sobs. "Michael died this morning. He had a heart attack at work. He's gone." There was a pause, and I heard her cover the phone and say something to someone else. When she returned, her voice was slightly more somber, but still distracted. "Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Are you sure? Maybe there's been a mistake." I saw his body's mom. There's no mistake. The fact that I had to convince my own mother that my husband was actually dead felt like another trauma on top of everything else. Well, this is quite a shock. But sweetie, we're in the middle of Jessica's 40th birthday celebration. Everyone's here. We've got caterers. Can you manage tonight? And we'll come by tomorrow when things settle down? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister's birthday party took precedence over her son-in-law's death, over her daughter and granddaughter's acute grief. Then my father got on the phone. Sarah, this is awful news. Was Michael's life insurance policy up to date? You know, you should call the company first thing tomorrow. Not I'm coming right over, not what can we do to help, but a question about life insurance while my husband's body was barely cold. I can't believe this is your response, I said, my voice hollow. My husband just died. Emma lost her father. And you're worried about a party. Now, Sarah, my father said in that condescending tone he'd used throughout my childhood. Jessica has been planning this milestone birthday for months. Everyone took time off work to be here. We can't just walk out. Be reasonable. Reasonable? As if grief followed any rules of reason. Forget I called, I said, and hung up. You know what happened within minutes of that call? My phone was flooded with text messages from friends who had somehow heard the news. Michael's college roommate, Brian, my colleague, Jennifer, even my old high school friend, Taylor, who I hadn't spoken to in years, all offering condolences, asking what they could do to help. Strangers showed more compassion than my own family. If you've ever felt abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened next showed me that some people's true nature only emerges when you're at your most vulnerable, and it was about to get so much worse. What my parents did 2 weeks later didn't just break my heart. It opened my eyes to a lifetime of patterns I'd been too loyal to see. Stay with me, because this story gets darker before it gets better. But I promise you, the ending will show you the power of standing up for yourself, even when it costs you everything you thought you knew about family. You know, before I tell you about the betrayal that shattered what was left of my world, I need you to understand what Michael and I had together. Because losing someone you love is devastating. But losing your soulmate, the person who was supposed to grow old with you, that's a different kind of pain entirely. Michael and I met at Northwestern University during my sophomore year. I was struggling hard in Economics 201, and honestly, I was ready to drop the class. Numbers weren't my thing, and depreciation curves might as well have been written in ancient Greek. That's when Michael walked into my life as the teaching assistant who stayed after every class to help confused students like me. I'll never forget our first one-on-one tutoring session. I was sitting in that cramped little office, frustrated tears threatening to spill, when Michael pulled up a chair right next to me, instead of sitting behind the desk like most TAs did. Hey, he said with this gentle smile, let's figure this out together. I promise it's not as scary as it looks. His patience was the first thing I fell in love with, followed quickly by his infectious laugh and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Most girls probably fell for his looks. Michael was definitely handsome with those warm brown eyes and that smile that could light up a room. But what got me was how he made economics feel like storytelling. He'd explain complex financial concepts using examples from our daily lives, turning boring graphs into relatable scenarios about families saving for their kids' college or planning for retirement. We started studying together, which turned into coffee dates, which turned into long walks around campus talking about everything and nothing. Michael had this way of listening, really listening, that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He'd remember tiny details I'd mentioned weeks earlier, like how I preferred vanilla lattes over caramel, or how I was worried about my mom's health scare. Everyone said we were crazy when we got engaged on graduation day. Michael had hidden the ring in my diploma case. Can you imagine? There I was, walking across that stage thinking about job interviews and student loans. And when I opened the case later, there was this beautiful ring with a note that said, "Will you let me help you figure out life's equations together?" Our friends kept saying we should wait, experience life as singles, travel, focus on our careers. "You're only 23, they'd say. You have your whole lives ahead of you. Why rush into marriage?" But here's the thing they didn't understand. Michael wasn't someone I wanted to experience life before settling down with. He was the person I wanted to experience everything with. Michael landed a position at Preston and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious financial advisory firms, right after finishing his MBA. I was so proud watching him work his way up. But what I loved most was that success never changed him. He could have easily become one of those financial advisors who pushes expensive products for higher commissions, but Michael genuinely cared about his clients' well-being. He'd spend hours explaining investment strategies to elderly couples, help young families create realistic budgets. And I can't tell you how many times he talked clients out of risky investments just because it was the right thing to do. We spent 5 blissful years as just the two of us. We traveled when we could afford it, spent lazy Sunday mornings reading newspapers in bed, hosted dinner parties in our tiny first apartment where Michael would cook elaborate meals he'd learned from YouTube videos. He had this habit of singing off-key in the shower every morning, and I used to tease him about it. But now I'd give anything to hear that terrible singing one more time. When we finally decided to try for a baby, we were so naive. We thought it would happen quickly, maybe within a few months. We had it all planned out. Michael would teach our kids about money and investing. I'd handle the creative stuff like art projects and bedtime stories. We even had names picked out and started looking at bigger apartments with good school districts. But life had other plans. What we thought would be an easy journey turned into 3 years of heartbreak that tested our marriage in ways we never expected. The first miscarriage hit us at 10 weeks, just after we'd started telling close friends and family. The second one happened at 8 weeks, and by then we'd learned to keep our joy more guarded, which somehow made the loss feel even more isolating. Then came the fertility treatments. If you've never been through IVF, let me tell you, it's not just emotionally exhausting, it's financially crushing. Insurance covered almost nothing, and each cycle cost us nearly $15,000 we didn't really have. Michael picked up extra consulting work on weekends, and I took on freelance projects, but watching our savings disappear while our dreams seemed further away was devastating. The worst part wasn't even the physical discomfort of all those injections and procedures. It was watching Michael blame himself. He'd stay up late researching supplements he should take, diets that might help, anything he could control. This man who could solve complex financial problems for his clients felt completely helpless when it came to starting our own family. We were actually discussing adoption seriously when I got pregnant with Emma. I remember taking that pregnancy test on a random Thursday morning, not expecting anything because we'd been disappointed so many times. When those 2 lines appeared, I literally sat on the bathroom floor and cried for 20 minutes before I could even tell Michael. But even then, we were terrified to get excited. The pregnancy was complicated from the start. I was on bed rest for the final 2 months. And Michael essentially became my full-time caregiver while still trying to maintain his client relationships. He'd bring me breakfast in bed every morning, work from the dining room table so he could check on me throughout the day, and spend evenings reading pregnancy books out loud to both me and our unborn daughter. I watched this incredibly successful, confident man learned to braid hair from YouTube videos because he was determined to do Emma's hair perfectly when she arrived. He assembled her crib 3 times because he wasn't satisfied with how sturdy it felt. He baby-proofed our entire house before she was even born, crawling around on his hands and knees to see potential hazards from a toddler's perspective. When Emma finally arrived after a difficult labor, Michael cried harder than I did. This strong, composed man held our tiny daughter against his chest like she was made of the most precious glass, whispering promises about all the adventures they'd have together and how he'd always protect her. For 8 beautiful years, we were that family I'd always dreamed of. Michael coached Emma's soccer team despite knowing absolutely nothing about soccer initially. He'd watch YouTube tutorials at night after she went to bed, determined to be the dad who could teach her proper form and strategy. His calendar was color-coded with Emma's activities: soccer practice in blue, piano lessons in green, school events in red, and he never missed a single one. But looking back now, there were warning signs about his health that we both ignored or explained away. The occasional chest pains he attributed to work stress. The shortness of breath he blamed on being out of shape. When his doctor mentioned his blood pressure was slightly elevated during his annual physical, we took the standard advice too casually. Take some aspirin. Exercise more. Cut back on sodium. Michael was only 34. We thought we had decades ahead of us. We were planning Emma's 9th birthday party, talking about maybe trying for another baby, discussing whether we should refinance our mortgage. We had so many plans, so many dreams still to fulfill. That's what makes losing him so much harder, and what made my family's betrayal so much more devastating. We weren't just a couple going through the motions. We were genuinely happy, genuinely in love, genuinely building something beautiful together. And when that was ripped away in an instant, the last thing I expected was for my own parents to see it as an opportunity. Stay with me, because what happened next will show you just how much some people can shock you when you're at your most vulnerable. The family that raised me was about to reveal their true colors, and it would change everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what family really means. You know what's cruel about tragedy? It always strikes on the most ordinary days. The day Michael died started exactly like every other Tuesday in our house. If I had known it would be our last morning together, I would have held on to every single moment a little longer. Michael was in the kitchen making his famous dinosaur pancakes for Emma, something he'd been doing since she was 3 years old. He had this whole routine down to an art form. He'd mix the batter while humming off-key, then carefully pour it into these ridiculous shapes that were supposed to be T-Rex and Triceratops, but honestly looked more like abstract art. Emma didn't care. To her, Daddy made the best dinosaur pancakes in the world, and that was all that mattered. I was at the counter packing Emma's lunch, her usual peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut into triangles because she insisted squares tasted different. Apple slices that had to be Honeycrisp, not Red Delicious, and those little goldfish crackers she was obsessed with. Michael was telling Emma some made-up story about how the pancake dinosaurs were going on adventures in her tummy, making her giggle that infectious 8-year-old laugh that could brighten anyone's day. "Don't forget to pick up more maple syrup today," Michael said, kissing my forehead as he grabbed his coffee. The real stuff, not that corn syrup garbage. He was passionate about authentic maple syrup, one of his many random strong opinions that I used to tease him about. "Got it," I said, not looking up from Emma's lunchbox. "The expensive stuff that costs more than our electric bill." He laughed and ruffled Emma's hair. "See you at your art show tonight, princess. I can't wait to see what masterpiece you created." Emma had been working on some secret project for weeks, And tonight was the night all the families would come see the kids' artwork displayed in the school gymnasium. "You promised, Daddy?" Emma asked, with that serious expression she got when something was really important to her. "Promise," Michael said, giving her a big hug. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Those were the last words my husband ever spoke to us. Such a simple promise, such an ordinary moment. If I had known, I would have told him I loved him one more time. I would have hugged him longer. I would have made him stay home that day. But life doesn't give you those kinds of warnings, does it? At 10:47 a.m., I was at home folding laundry and thinking about what to make for dinner when my phone rang. It was Amanda, Michael's assistant at the financial firm. Amanda had worked with Michael for 3 years, and she'd never called me during work hours unless it was to coordinate surprise birthday plans or ask about his calendar. "Sarah?" she said, and immediately I knew something was wrong. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. Michael collapsed during the client meeting. He just fell over. The paramedics are here. They're working on him now. They're taking him to Northwestern Memorial." Time stopped. I remember dropping my coffee mug, and the sound of ceramic shattering on our kitchen tile seemed to echo forever. I kept saying, "What? What happened? Is he okay?" But Amanda was crying now, and all she could say was, "I don't know. I don't know. Just get here." I called our neighbor Ellen in a panic. "Ellen, I need you to pick up Emma from school. Michael's in the hospital. I have to go." I didn't even wait for her response. I just grabbed my keys and ran. The drive to Northwestern Memorial was 23 minutes of pure terror. I broke every speed limit, ran red lights, and prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. I kept bargaining with God, if you let him be okay. I'll be a better wife, a better person. I'll volunteer more. I'll donate to charity. Just please let my husband be okay. I called Michael's phone over and over, knowing he wouldn't answer, but needing to hear his voicemail message just to hear his voice. "Hey, you've reached Michael. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I must have called 15 times during that drive. When I got to the emergency room, I ran to the front desk, completely out of breath. My husband, Michael Thompson. He was brought in by ambulance. Where is he? I need to see him right now. The nurse looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Pity mixed with something else I couldn't identify at the time. Now I know it was the look people give you when they know something you don't know yet. Something that's going to destroy your world. "Ma'am, please have a seat. The doctor will be right with you." "No, I don't want to sit down. I want to see my husband. Where is he?" That's when Dr. Martinez came out. He was this kind-looking older man with gentle eyes, and he asked me to sit down with him. I knew. Even before he said the words, I knew. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. Your husband suffered a massive heart attack. By the time the paramedics got him here, he'd been down for too long. We did everything we could, but we weren't able to revive him. He was pronounced dead at 11:23 a.m. 11:23. I was folding Emma's little pink t-shirts at 11:23, completely unaware that my world was ending. "Can I see him?" I whispered, because my voice had just disappeared. They led me to this sterile room where Michael was lying on a gurney, looking like he was just sleeping. His skin was still warm when I touched his face. His hair was still perfectly styled the way he'd combed it that morning. He looked so peaceful, so normal, that I kept waiting for him to open his eyes and tell me this was all some terrible mistake. But his chest wasn't moving. That strong, steady heartbeat I'd fallen asleep listening to for 11 years was just silent. I don't know how long I stood there. The nurses were so patient, letting me say goodbye, letting me tell him all the things I should have said that morning. I told him about Emma's art show, about the maple syrup I was supposed to buy, about how much I loved him, and how I didn't know how to do this life without him. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork and impossible decisions. The funeral home needed to know: cremation or burial? What kind of service? Did he have a favorite suit? Questions that seemed ridiculous when all I wanted was to crawl into that hospital bed with my husband and pretend this wasn't real. But the hardest part was still ahead of me. I had to go pick up Emma from Ellen's house. I had to look at my 8-year-old daughter and tell her that Daddy wasn't coming to her art show, that Daddy wasn't coming home ever again. How do you destroy a child's world with words? How do you explain that the man who made dinosaur pancakes that very morning was gone forever? The drive to Ellen's house was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I kept practicing what I would say, but every version sounded wrong. How do you make sense of something that doesn't make sense? When I pulled into Ellen's driveway, I could see Emma through the window, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, completely unaware that her life had just changed forever. She looked so small, so innocent, so trusting that her world was safe and predictable. That's when I truly understood what people mean when they say grief is physical pain. My chest felt like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart until it couldn't beat properly. I sat in that driveway for 5 full minutes, trying to figure out how to be strong enough for what came next, because in that moment, everything changed. I wasn't just Sarah anymore. I was Emma's only parent, her only protector, the only one left to make sense of a senseless world. And somehow, I had to find the strength to help her through this when I was completely falling apart myself. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of the hardest lesson I'd ever learn about who really shows up when your world collapses. Walking into Ellen's house to pick up Emma was like walking toward my own execution. Ellen took one look at my face and immediately knew. She wrapped me in a hug without saying a word, and I could see the tears forming in her eyes. "How do I tell her?" I whispered. Ellen squeezed my hand. "You just love her through it," she said. "That's all you can do." Emma looked up from her homework with that bright smile that was so much like Michael's. "Mommy, Mrs. Ellen let me have chocolate chip cookies, and I finished all my math problems. Where's Daddy? Is he coming to my art show?" My heart shattered into a million pieces. She was still living in the world where Daddy existed, where promises were kept, where 8-year-olds didn't have to learn about death and loss and heartbreak. "Emma, sweetie, we need to talk. Can you come sit with me in the car?" She gathered her backpack and skipped to the car, chattering about her day, about how excited she was for the art show, about how she couldn't wait to show Daddy her project. I helped her into her booster seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the buckle. I started driving toward home, but I knew I couldn't wait. I couldn't drive while having this conversation, so I pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and turned to face my daughter, Emma. Something very sad happened today. Her face immediately changed. Kids have this incredible intuition. They can sense when their world is about to shift. "Where's Daddy?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "He promised to come to my art show tonight." I took her little hands in mine. They were so small, so trusting. "Daddy got very sick at work today, sweetheart." His heart stopped working. Emma's face scrunched up in confusion. "Can the doctors fix it? Like when I had strep throat and they gave me medicine?" The innocent hope in her question, the absolute faith that grown-ups could fix anything, broke something inside me that I don't think ever fully healed. No, baby. When someone's heart stops working completely, the doctors can't fix it. Daddy died today. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Those beautiful blue eyes, exactly like Michael's, trying to process information that no child should ever have to understand. Does that mean Daddy isn't coming home? Ever? I nodded, unable to speak through my tears. That's when Emma let out a sound that still haunts me. It wasn't crying. It was this primal wail that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. The pure sound of a child's heart breaking in real time. She threw herself into my arms, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. I want Daddy. Please, I want my daddy. All I could do was hold her and cry with her, parked on the side of a busy road while life continued all around us, completely oblivious to our shattered world. Cars kept driving past. People kept going about their normal Tuesday evening routines while Emma and I fell apart in each other's arms. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just crying together. Finally, Emma pulled back and looked at me with those red, swollen eyes. "Mommy, what happens to my art show?" "We'll skip it tonight, sweetheart. You can show me your project when we get home." "But I made it for Daddy," she whispered. "It's a picture of our family. I wanted him to see it." If you're a parent watching this, you know that feeling, when your child's pain cuts deeper than your own, when you do anything to take their hurt away but you're completely powerless. I would have traded places with Michael in a heartbeat if it meant Emma didn't have to feel this loss. That evening, after I'd finally gotten Emma to sleep in my bed, she was clutching one of Michael's unwashed t-shirts for comfort. The full reality of what had happened hit me like a freight train. I sat on our bathroom floor with the door closed so Emma wouldn't hear me, and I completely broke down. The physical pain of grief is something people don't warn you about. It felt like someone was repeatedly punching me in the chest. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't think straight. I needed my parents. I needed someone to tell me how to survive this. With shaking hands, I called my mom and dad. They'd been married for 40 years. They'd weathered losses together, raised 2 daughters, dealt with family crises. Surely they would know what to say. Surely they would drop everything and come help their daughter through the worst night of her life. Mom answered on the 5th ring, and immediately I could hear laughter and music in the background. Loud voices, clinking glasses, the sound of a party in full swing. "Mom," I choked out, barely able to form words through my sobs. "Michael died this morning. He had a heart attack at work. He's gone." There was a pause, and I heard her cover the phone and say something to someone else. When she came back, her voice was slightly more serious but still distracted. "Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Honey, are you sure? Maybe there's been some kind of mistake?" "I saw his body. Mom, there's no mistake." The fact that I had to convince my own mother that my husband was actually dead felt like another trauma layered on top of everything else. "Well, this is quite a shock. But sweetie, we're right in the middle of Jessica's 40th birthday celebration. Everyone's here. Your Aunt Linda flew in from Seattle. The caterers just arrived. Can you manage tonight? And we'll come by tomorrow when things settle down?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister's birthday party, my sister who was turning 40, not 4, took precedence over her son-in-law's death and her daughter's acute grief. Then Dad got on the phone. "Sarah, this is awful news. I'm so sorry. But tell me, was Michael's life insurance policy up to date? You know, you should call the company first thing tomorrow morning. Not 'we're coming right over.' Didn't. Not 'what can we do to help?' Not even 'how's Emma handling this?' The first thing out of my father's mouth was a question about money, while my husband's body was barely cold. "I can't believe this is your response," I said, my voice hollow with shock. "My husband just died. Emma lost her father. And you're worried about a party and life insurance?" "Now, Sarah, Dad said in that condescending tone he'd used throughout my childhood. Jessica has been planning this milestone birthday for months. Everyone took time off work to be here. We can't just abandon our guests. Be reasonable. Reasonable? As if grief followed any logical timeline. As if my daughter's broken heart could wait until it was convenient for everyone else. Forget I called, I said, and hung up. But you know what happened within minutes of that devastating phone call? My phone started buzzing with text messages from people who had somehow heard the news. Brian, Michael's college roommate, texted that he was driving up from Springfield and would be there in 3 hours. My colleague Jennifer sent a message saying she was bringing dinner and didn't care if I wasn't hungry. She was coming anyway. Even Taylor, my high school friend who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, called offering to take time off work to help with whatever I needed. My neighbor Ellen knocked on the door with a casserole and just sat with me at the kitchen table. Not saying much. Just being present while I tried to make a list of people to call. She offered to stay the night. And honestly, I almost said yes because the thought of being alone with my grief felt overwhelming. Strangers showed more compassion than my own parents. People who barely knew Michael were dropping everything to support Emma and me, while the people who raised me couldn't be bothered to leave a birthday party. That night, lying in bed with Emma curled up beside me, I realized something that would change my relationship with my family forever. This wasn't just poor timing or bad judgment. This was who they really were when the facade of family obligation was stripped away. This was their true character revealed under pressure. I stared at the ceiling all night, feeling the absence of Michael's warmth beside me like a physical wound, but alongside the grief, something else was growing, a clarity I'd never had before about what real love and support actually look like. Because if my own parents could abandon me in my darkest hour, what else were they capable of? I was about to find out, and it would be so much worse than I could have ever imagined. What happened at Michael's funeral, and then 2 weeks later in my own living room, would shatter every illusion I had about family loyalty and teach me the hardest lesson of my life about protecting the people you love from the people who were supposed to love you. The 4 days between Michael's death and his funeral were a blur of impossible decisions and overwhelming grief. Have you ever had to plan a funeral? It's surreal. You're making choices about flowers and music and caskets when all you want to do is crawl into bed and pretend none of this is happening. I was completely lost. Do we do burial or cremation? What kind of service? Should there be a viewing? Michael and I had never talked about these things because we were young and thought we had forever. We were busy planning Emma's birthday parties and family vacations, not funeral arrangements. Thomas, Michael's lawyer friend from college, helped me navigate the legal paperwork while I stumbled through the emotional decisions. Take your time, he kept saying. But how much time do you need to choose between oak and mahogany for your husband's casket? How do you pick flowers for the man who used to bring you wildflowers just because it was Tuesday? During those 4 days, my phone was constantly ringing. Michael's colleagues from the firm called, offering to help with anything I needed. His college friends reached out with memories and support. Even clients he'd worked with sent flowers and condolence cards. But my parents? They called exactly once, briefly, to ask what time the service started and whether they should wear black or if it was one of those celebration of life things with colorful clothes. They didn't offer to help with arrangements. They didn't ask how Emma was coping. They didn't even ask if I needed them to come early to help greet people. It was like they were attending a distant acquaintance's funeral, not their son-in-law's memorial service. The morning of the funeral, I woke up to bright sunshine streaming through our bedroom windows. It felt cruel somehow, like the world should be gray and stormy to match how broken everything felt inside. Emma climbed into bed with me around 7 a.m., already dressed in the blue dress she'd insisted on wearing. "Why blue, sweetheart?" I asked, brushing her hair. "Because Daddy always said I looked like a princess when I wore blue," she said matter-of-factly. "I want to look pretty for him today." I braided a small section of her hair along her temple, the way Michael used to do for special occasions. My hands were shaking, but I managed to make it look just like he would have. Emma sat perfectly still, and when I was done, she looked at herself in the mirror and smiled for the first time since Tuesday. "Daddy would like this," she said softly. We arrived at the funeral home an hour early because I wanted to greet people as they came in. That's when I got my first real glimpse of who Michael had been to the people in his life. His colleagues from Preston and Associates arrived first, and I was amazed by how genuinely devastated they were. These were successful, composed business professionals, and many of them were openly crying. James, Michael's office mate, pulled me aside. "Sarah, I need you to know. Michael talked about you and Emma constantly, every Monday morning. He'd tell us about your weekend adventures, every client meeting. He'd mention something funny Emma had said. You two were his whole world." One by one, his co-workers shared little stories with Emma that I'd never heard. How Daddy kept a picture of her soccer team on his desk and bragged about her goals to anyone who would listen. How he'd learned to French braid by watching YouTube videos because he wanted to do her hair perfectly for picture day. How he'd negotiate client meetings around her school events because family always comes first. Michael's brother David had flown in from Denver, and seeing him was like seeing a ghost. He had Michael's same smile, the same way of tilting his head when he was listening intently. He sat next to Emma throughout the service, holding her hand, both of them with identical blue eyes filled with tears. Meanwhile, where were my parents? They were supposed to arrive early, too, to help greet people and support me through this impossible day. Instead, I got a text message 20 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. Running late due to traffic, save us seats in the front row. They finally walked in as people were being seated, making a small commotion as they found their way to the reserved seats. My mother was wearing an expensive black dress I'd never seen before, and she hugged me briefly while overwhelming me with her perfume. "Sorry we're late," she whispered. The traffic was terrible, and Jessica had such a hard time finding something appropriate to wear on such short notice. Short notice? Michael had been dead for 4 days. How much advance planning does it take to find black clothes? Throughout the entire service, I was acutely aware of my family's behavior. Jessica was checking her phone, actually scrolling through social media during her brother-in-law's funeral. Dad kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Mom would dab at her eyes occasionally, but they were completely dry. It was all for show. The contrast was stark and painful. Michael's colleagues were genuinely distraught, sharing memories and offering real comfort. Our friends were crying authentic tears, holding Emma when she needed hugs, making sure I was drinking water and had someone to lean on. But my own family seemed like they were enduring an obligation rather than grieving a loss. When it came time for me to give the eulogy, I wasn't sure I could do it. My legs felt like lead as I approached the podium, but then I looked at Emma sitting there so brave and small in her blue dress, and I found strength I didn't know I had. I spoke about Michael's kindness, his integrity, his boundless love for Emma. I talked about his terrible dad jokes that made us groan and laugh at the same time, about his irrational hatred of cilantro and his passionate defense of real maple syrup, about how he always put family first. The irony of those last words wasn't lost on me as I glanced at my parents, who were already gathering their things as I concluded, clearly eager to leave. During the reception at our house afterward, the differences became even more obvious. Michael's colleagues' wives took over the kitchen, organizing food and making sure everyone was fed. Our friends handled the cleanup, managed the guest book, and made sure Emma was okay when she got overwhelmed by all the people. My family? They sat in the living room accepting condolences as if they were the primary mourners, while everyone else did the actual work of hosting and supporting. That's when I overheard my father talking to my Uncle Robert near the refreshment table. Michael was doing very well at that firm. Partner track. You know. The life insurance alone must be substantial, not to mention his 401k and investments. Sarah will be set for life. It took everything in me not to confront him right then and there. My husband had been dead for 4 days, and Dad was already calculating the financial windfall. At my husband's funeral reception, while I was trying to thank people for coming and make sure Emma wasn't falling apart, my father was discussing money with my uncle like Michael's death was some kind of lottery win. Meanwhile, Michael's parents, who had lost their only son, were models of grace and genuine support. His mother, Diana, took care of Emma during the reception, making sure she ate something and protecting her from well-meaning but overwhelming guests. His father, Robert, quietly organized the cleanup afterward, staying until the last guest had left and making sure I wasn't left alone with the mess. The contrast was devastating. Here were Michael's parents, drowning in their own grief over losing their child, and they still found the strength to take care of me and Emma. But my own parents, who should have been my first line of support, were treating this like a social obligation and a financial opportunity. As the house finally emptied of guests, my parents and Jessica made quick excuses about getting on the road before dark. They left with perfunctory hugs and promises to call soon. They didn't offer to stay and help clean up. They didn't ask if Emma and I wanted company for our first night after officially saying goodbye to Michael. They didn't acknowledge that this would be the beginning of our new reality without him. Instead, David and Michael's parents stayed. Diana made up the guest room for Michael's parents and the couch for David. "We'll be right here if you need anything during the night," Diana said, hugging me tightly. "You're not alone. Sarah, remember that." But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Emma's soft breathing beside me, I couldn't help but feel that in one crucial way, I was very much alone. The people who should have been my bedrock in this crisis had proven themselves unworthy of that role. I had no idea that this was just the beginning. What my parents would do 2 weeks later would make their behavior at the funeral look like a minor slight. They were about to show me just how far they were willing to go when they thought there was money involved, and it would change everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and love. 2 weeks after Michael's funeral, I was sitting at our kitchen table trying to make sense of our health insurance situation when the doorbell rang. Emma was at school, her first week back since losing her father. The teachers were being incredibly supportive, sending me regular updates about how she was adjusting. And honestly, having that routine was probably the best thing for both of us. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing on the porch. Dad was straightening his golf shirt, and Mom was checking her reflection in her compact mirror. I hadn't spoken to them since the funeral. They'd sent a few generic text messages like, "thinking of you," and "hope you're doing okay." But there had been no real communication, no offers to help, no checking in on Emma. I opened the door, not bothering to hide my surprise. "I didn't know you were coming over. We thought we'd check in. See how you and Emma are doing," Mom said, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Is she at school? Good. We can talk openly." That should have been my first warning sign that this wasn't simply a supportive visit, but I was too emotionally drained to pick up on it. I was still in that fog of grief where everything felt surreal and you're just trying to get through each day. They settled themselves in the living room while I went to make coffee, falling into that automatic hostess role even though they should have been taking care of me. When I brought in the mugs, Dad was examining the new sound system Michael had installed just a month before his death, one of his last projects. Actually, he'd been so excited about getting the speakers positioned perfectly. "Nice setup," Dad commented, running his hand along the equipment. Michael had good taste in electronics. He did, I agreed, the simple past tense still feeling like a knife twist in my heart. After a few minutes of awkward small talk about Emma's school and Mom's garden club, Dad cleared his throat in that way he always did before discussing serious matters, the same throat clearing that preceded conversations about my college grades or my choice to marry Michael so young. "Sarah, we wanted to talk to you about your situation," he began, setting his coffee mug down precisely on the coaster. "My situation? Your financial situation," Mom clarified, exchanging glances with Dad. "Now that you're adjusting to life without Michael?" I stared at them, not comprehending at first what they were getting at. My financial situation? I was barely functioning enough to remember to eat meals, and they wanted to discuss finances? "I'm not sure what you mean. Michael left us well provided for." "Yes, well, that's what we wanted to discuss," Dad said, leaning forward with that businesslike expression I remembered from childhood. "Your mother and I are getting older. Our retirement fund took a hit in the last market downturn, and with healthcare costs what they are." The implication hung in the air for a moment before I understood what was happening. "Are you asking me for money? Now?" Mom had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but Dad pressed on. "We thought, given Michael's position at the firm and his life insurance policy, that you might be in a position to help family. After all, we are your parents. We raised you. We helped with your college education, with the down payment on your first house." The audacity of their request left me momentarily speechless. My husband wasn't even cold in his grave, and they were here with their hands out like vultures circling a fresh kill. "How much are you thinking?" I asked, my voice completely flat. Dad, apparently missing my tone entirely, actually brightened. "Well, we were thinking something substantial would make sense. Perhaps 50% of the life insurance payout. That would secure our retirement and still leave plenty for you and Emma." 50% of my widowed daughter's security to fund their retirement. The daughter they couldn't be bothered to comfort when her husband died because they were too busy at a birthday party. 50% of my husband's life insurance to secure your retirement, I repeated slowly, making sure I understood. The same parents who told me to manage the night my husband died because you had party guests. Mom flinched, but Dad remained completely unperturbed. "Now, Sarah, there's no need to be emotional about this. It's just practical financial planning. And we did come to the funeral. How generous of you to attend my husband's funeral," I said, sarcasm dripping from my voice. "We raised you, Sarah," Mom interjected. "We paid for your college education. We helped with the down payment on your first house. I think we deserve some consideration now that you've come into money." Come into money. Like my husband's death was some kind of lottery win instead of the most devastating loss of my life. That's when something inside me snapped. All the grief and hurt from the past 2 weeks crystallized into razor-sharp clarity. But before I could respond, I remembered something that made this whole conversation even more sickening. The day before, I'd been going through Michael's financial documents, trying to understand our situation, get organized, figure out what needed to be done. That's when I found a sealed envelope with my name on it in Michael's handwriting, dated just 3 months earlier. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, it means the doctor's concerns about my heart were more serious than I let on. I didn't want to worry you, but I've updated our will and insurance policies just in case. But it was the next paragraph that had shaken me to my core. I've set up a separate trust for Emma that can't be accessed until she's 25, except for education expenses. This is important. Sarah, your father has approached me twice about investment opportunities that were thinly veiled requests for money. I declined politely, but he seemed to think my death would create an opportunity for him to access funds through you. Don't let that happen. Your parents have made poor financial choices for years, and while I sympathize, Emma's future cannot be compromised to bail them out. Michael had known. He'd seen right through my father's schemes and had protected us even from beyond the grave. My own husband had to shield me from my parents' greed, and he'd done it without ever telling me because he was trying to preserve my relationship with my family. Sitting there in my living room, watching my parents calculate how to profit from Michael's death, I realized that my husband had understood my family better than I ever had. He'd seen what I'd been too loyal, too hopeful, too naive to see, that when push came to shove, my parents would prioritize their own interests over their daughter's well-being. "Get out," I said quietly. "Sarah, be reasonable." Mom began. "Get out of my house," I screamed, the force of my anger physically propelling me to my feet. "How dare you come here asking for Michael's money? How dare you see my husband's death as your financial opportunity? He was worth 100 of you, and you couldn't even be bothered to comfort your own daughter when she was breaking apart." My parents looked genuinely shocked at my outburst. They had never seen me truly angry before. They'd raised me to be accommodating, to avoid conflict, to be the good daughter, while Jessica got to be demanding and dramatic. "We're only asking for what's fair," Dad said stiffly, standing up. "We're your parents, Sarah. We deserve respect." "Respect is earned," I replied, my voice shaking with fury, "and you've earned exactly none. Now get out before Emma comes home and hears what kind of people her grandparents really are." They left in a huff. Mom making noises about me being ungrateful and Dad muttering about reconsidering our relationship. I closed the door behind them and sank to the floor, trembling with rage and hurt. Michael's letter had prepared me for this moment, but living it was still devastating. My own parents had just confirmed that they saw their son-in-law's death not as a tragedy, but as a business opportunity. They'd calculated exactly how much money they thought they deserved from their grieving daughter's insurance payout. But you know what? For the first time since Michael died, I felt something other than overwhelming sadness. I felt proud. Proud that I'd stood up for myself and for Emma. Proud that I'd honored Michael's wishes and protected what he'd worked so hard to provide for us. And I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd married a man wise enough to see through my family's facade and loving enough to protect us even after he was gone. What happened next would test everything I thought I knew about family. But I was ready for it. Because Michael had given me more than financial security. He'd given me the truth about who really deserved my loyalty. After I threw my parents out of the house, I sat on my kitchen floor for what felt like hours, just shaking. The audacity of what they'd just asked for was still sinking in. 50% of Michael's life insurance, money that was meant to secure Emma's future, pay for her college, make sure she never had to worry about being taken care of. And they wanted half of it to fund their retirement because family helps family. The irony was devastating. Where was that family loyalty when I called them sobbing the night Michael died? Where was that family helps family mentality when I needed emotional support? When Emma needed her grandparents to show up for her, I called Thomas, Michael's lawyer friend, that afternoon to make sure I understood our legal situation correctly. "They have absolutely no claim to any of it," he assured me. "Michael designated you as the sole beneficiary of everything. even if they tried to contest it, which they can't. Parents have no automatic right to inherit from adult children, especially when there's a surviving spouse and child. That should have made me feel better, but I had a sinking feeling this wasn't over. My father can be incredibly stubborn when he thinks he deserves something, and the way he'd talked about this being practical financial planning told me he genuinely believed he was entitled to Michael's money. When I went to pick up Emma from school that afternoon, I was still rattled. I was trying to act normal, but kids pick up on everything, don't they? Emma was quieter than usual during the drive home. And finally, as we were pulling into our driveway, she spoke up. "Mommy, why were Grandma and Grandpa at our house today?" My heart sank. "Did you see them, sweetheart?" She nodded. "Mrs. Wilson let me go to the bathroom during math, and I saw their car from the classroom window. Did they bring something for us?" The innocent question broke my heart all over again. Here was my 8-year-old daughter, who had just lost her father, hoping that maybe her grandparents had come to bring comfort or support or just to check on us. "No, honey, they just came to talk to me about some grown-up things." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked something that absolutely floored me. "Did they ask about Daddy's money?" I nearly rear-ended my own garage door. "What makes you say that?" "I heard Grandpa at the funeral," she said, looking down at her hands. "He was talking to Uncle Robert about how we would get lots of money because Daddy died. Is that true?" The fact that my 8-year-old daughter had overheard such a conversation at her father's funeral made me physically ill. What kind of grandfather discusses inheritance money within earshot of a grieving child? I pulled into the garage and turned off the engine, then turned to face Emma fully. "Emma, your daddy made sure we would be taken care of." "Yes, but money doesn't make up for not having him here with us." She nodded with that solemn wisdom that children sometimes display when they're forced to grow up too fast. "I would give all the money in the world to have Daddy back." "Me too, baby," I whispered. "Me too." That evening, after Emma was asleep, I called David, Michael's brother who had flown in from Denver for the funeral but was planning to come back for an extended visit during his summer break to help us adjust. "Are you kidding me?" he exploded when I told him about my parents' visit and their demand. "They want half of Michael's life insurance? That's insane. Sarah, that money is for you and Emma's future." "I know," I said, still feeling shaky from the whole confrontation. "But I'm worried they might not let this go. Dad can be very persistent when he thinks he deserves something." David was quiet for a moment. "Michael talked to me about his financial planning. He was incredibly thorough about making sure Emma would be taken care of through college and beyond, if anything happened to him. He would be furious about your parents trying to take that security away from her. I found a letter he wrote." I told David about Michael's warning regarding my father's previous attempts to get money from him. He knew this might happen. He tried to protect us even from this. "That's so like Michael," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Always thinking 3 steps ahead, always protecting the people he loved. Don't let them manipulate you. Sarah." Michael worked hard for that security, and he meant it for you and Emma, not for your parents' poor financial choices. The next day brought a flood of text messages from my family. From Dad, "We need to discuss the situation like adults. Call me." From Mom, "I raised you better than this." Sarah, "Family comes first." And surprisingly, from Jessica, "You've always been selfish, but this is low even for you. Mom and Dad deserve better." The hypocrisy of Jessica, who had barely looked up from her phone during Michael's funeral, accusing me of being selfish, was almost laughable. Almost, if it weren't so painful. But what really got to me was that text from Mom. "Family comes first. Because that's exactly what I was doing, putting my family first. My real family. Emma and me. The family Michael had created with his love and protected with his foresight. That evening, as Emma and I were eating dinner, one of those simple mac and cheese meals that had become our routine because I could barely manage complicated cooking, my father called. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail that made my blood boil. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. We need to have a family meeting at our house Sunday afternoon. This concerns all of us. Be there at 2 o'clock. Bring Emma." The entitlement in his voice, the assumption that he could just command my presence, the fact that he wanted to involve Emma in this ugly situation, it all made me furious. But it also made me realize something important. This had to end. I couldn't keep avoiding them or hoping they'd just give up. I needed to face this head on and make it clear, once and for all, that their behavior was unacceptable. "Was that Grandpa?" Emma asked, pushing her macaroni around on her plate. "Yes," I admitted. "He wants us to come over on Sunday," I said carefully. "He wants to talk about some things." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do we have to go?" The fact that my daughter, who used to love visiting her grandparents, now seemed reluctant, spoke volumes about how their behavior had affected her, too. "I think we should," I said. "Sometimes it's important to face difficult situations directly, to stand up for what's right." Emma nodded, and I saw a look of determination cross her face that reminded me so much of Michael it took my breath away. "Okay," she said, "but can I bring something with me? I have an idea." "What kind of idea?" I asked, curious about the sudden intensity in her voice. "Just something Daddy taught me about standing up for yourself," she said cryptically. "Can I use the computer after dinner?" "Of course," I agreed, wondering what my 8-year-old was planning, but trusting that whatever it was came from the good heart and strong values her father had helped instill in her. As I watched Emma work on her mysterious project that evening, hunched over her desk with colored pencils and paper, I realized that Sunday's confrontation was about more than just money. It was about teaching Emma what real family loyalty looked like. It was about showing her that standing up for yourself isn't mean or selfish, it's necessary. And it was about honoring Michael's memory by protecting what he'd worked so hard to provide for us. I had no idea that my 8-year-old daughter was about to teach my parents a lesson about family that would change everything. But I was about to find out that sometimes the most powerful truths come from the smallest voices, and that Michael's values lived on in Emma in ways that would amaze and inspire me. Sunday was coming, and we were ready. Sunday morning arrived with a sense of impending doom. Emma was unusually quiet as we got dressed, but there was this determined set to her small shoulders that reminded me so much of Michael before an important client meeting. She clutched that manila envelope she'd been working on all week, still refusing to tell me exactly what was inside. "Are you sure you want to come?" I asked her one last time as we prepared to leave. "You could stay with Mrs. Ellen instead." She shook her head firmly. "I need to be there, Mom. For Daddy." The drive to my parents' house felt like driving to my own execution. As we pulled into the driveway of the suburban home where I'd grown up, I noticed several cars I recognized. My Aunt Linda's Honda, my Uncle Robert's pickup truck, and my dad's brother Pete's BMW. My parents had apparently invited an audience. "They brought backup," I said to Emma, who was studying the cars with those wise 8-year-old eyes. "That's okay," she said, squaring her shoulders. "We have Daddy with us." Walking into that house felt like entering enemy territory. The living room where I'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays now felt like a courtroom. Dad sat in his recliner, positioned like a judge presiding over proceedings. Jessica was perched on the arm of the sofa, scrolling through her phone as usual. Around the room sat Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and Uncle Pete, with his wife Carol. "Thank you for coming," Dad said formally, as if this were a board meeting rather than a family discussion. "We have important matters to address." I remained standing, keeping Emma close to my side. "Before we start, I want to be clear that whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Emma. She has a right to know what's happening in her family." Mom frowned. "Sarah, this is hardly appropriate conversation for a child. If it's not appropriate for her to hear, then it's not appropriate for you to be asking," I replied evenly. "This concerns her future, too." Dad cleared his throat and reached for a folder on the side table. "Fine, we'll get right to the point. Your mother and I have prepared a formal proposal regarding the distribution of Michael's assets." A formal proposal, like my husband's death was a business merger. "As you know," he continued, "we helped you considerably throughout your life: college tuition, down payment on your first house, wedding expenses. We believe that given the substantial windfall you've received from Michael's passing, it's only fair that you assist the family in return." I bit back the response that they'd paid half as much for my education as they had for Jessica's art school, which she never even finished. This wasn't the time for old grievances. We're proposing a distribution that would secure our retirement and also provide some assistance to Jessica, who, as you know, has struggled financially as an artist. He handed me a printed document. "As you'll see, we're suggesting 50% of the life insurance proceeds be directed to your mother and me, with an additional 15% allocated to Jessica." I scanned the document, which wasn't just percentages but actual dollar amounts. They had somehow discovered the exact value of Michael's life insurance policy, probably through Uncle Robert, who worked in insurance. "You want 65% of the money that's meant to secure my daughter's future after losing her father," I stated flatly. "Money that Michael earned and specifically designated for us. Family takes care of family." "Sarah," Mom interjected, "your father and I are getting older. Our medical expenses are increasing. Now you have to think about the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" I repeated. "Like how you couldn't leave Jessica's birthday party when my husband died. That bigger picture?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Aunt Linda shifted in her seat, looking embarrassed. At least someone had the decency to recognize how inappropriate this all was. "Now, Sarah," Dad said in that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood, "we've apologized for that unfortunate timing, but you have to understand we had guests from out of town. We couldn't just abandon them." "Actually, you could have," I replied. "You chose not to." "This isn't productive," Jessica cut in, finally looking up from her phone. "The point is, you're suddenly rich while the rest of us are struggling. Mom and Dad sacrificed for you your whole life. They deserve security in their old age." "And what about Emma's security?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Do you think Michael died so that you could buy a new car or take cruises? That money is for his daughter's future." Dad stood up, his face reddening. "Now you listen here. We are your parents. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. You owe us respect and consideration." "Respect?" I laughed bitterly. "You haven't shown me or Emma an ounce of respect or genuine concern since Michael died. All you care about is what you can get from us." "That's not true," Mom protested weakly. "We care about you, Sarah. We're just trying to be practical." "Practical would be asking how your granddaughter is coping with losing her father," I shot back. "Practical would be offering to help with meals or housework or emotional support. This isn't practical. This is vulture behavior." Uncle Pete looked uncomfortable, staring at the floor. while his wife, Carol, was openly glaring at my father. Even some of the extended family could see how wrong this was. Into this tense silence, Emma suddenly stepped forward, still clutching her envelope. "I have something to say," she announced in a clear, strong voice that startled everyone. Mom attempted a condescending smile. "Sweetie, the adults are talking about important things right now." But Emma stood her ground, channeling that quiet confidence I'd fallen in love with in Michael. "This is important, too. It's about my daddy and what he would want." All eyes turned to her. The small figure standing so bravely in the center of adult conflict. Even Jessica put down her phone. "Daddy taught me that when people show you who they really are, you should believe them," Emma said, her voice only slightly trembling. "And when people only come around when they want something, they're not really family." She turned to face my parents directly. "You didn't come see us when Daddy died. You didn't help Mom when she was crying every night. You didn't ask me if I was okay or if I needed anything. You only came when you wanted money." The raw truth from an 8-year-old's mouth seemed to land differently than when I had said similar things. Mom's carefully composed face crumpled slightly, while Dad seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Emma opened her envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper. "I made something for you because I know that's why you really came to see us." She walked over and handed the paper to Dad. It was designed to look like an invoice, but as I glimpsed it over his shoulder, I saw it was unlike any bill I'd ever seen. At the top, in Emma's careful 8-year-old handwriting, it read, "Bill for real love and support." Listed below were items like being there when Daddy died, $0, not provided. Helping Mom when she was sad, $0, not provided. Hugging me when I cried for Daddy, $0, not provided. Being real grandparents, priceless, but not earned. At the bottom was a total, $0. "That's what you came for, right? Money? This is what you've earned?" The silence in the room was absolute. Dad's hands were trembling as he held the paper. Mom began to cry, whether from shame or manipulation. I couldn't tell. Jessica stared at Emma with an expression of shock, as if seeing her niece for the first time. Even Uncle Pete and Aunt Linda looked stunned by the simple truth an 8-year-old had just delivered. "I think we're done here," I said quietly, taking Emma's hand. "Don't contact us again unless it's to apologize and show genuine change. Emma deserves better grandparents than you've been, and I deserve better parents." As we walked out, leaving my stunned family behind, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and liberation. We had lost more than Michael. We had lost the illusion of a supportive extended family. But in that loss, there was also clarity and the freedom to rebuild our lives without toxic obligations. In the car, I hugged Emma tightly. "That was incredibly brave, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." She hugged me back. "Daddy always said we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." "Was I right, Mom?" "Yes, baby," I assured her, tears streaming down my face. "You were absolutely right." My 8-year-old daughter had just taught my parents a lesson about family that I'd been too afraid to deliver myself. And in doing so, she'd shown me that Michael's greatest legacy wasn't money. It was the values he'd instilled in both of us. The silence that followed Emma's invoice was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. You know that moment in movies when everything stops and you can hear a pin drop? That was this moment, except it was real life. And my 8-year-old daughter had just delivered the most powerful truth bomb I'd ever witnessed. Dad was staring at that piece of paper, like it contained nuclear codes. His hands were actually shaking as he read Emma's careful handwriting. Mom had gone completely pale, And for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed genuinely speechless. Even Jessica had put her phone face down on the coffee table, her mouth slightly open in shock. Uncle Pete cleared his throat awkwardly and stood up. "You know what? Maybe we should go. This seems like something you all need to work out privately." His wife Carol was already gathering her purse, shooting disapproving looks at my parents, but Emma wasn't done. She walked back to me, took my hand, and looked directly at my parents with those clear blue eyes, so much like Michael's. "Mommy's been sad every day since Daddy died," she said, her voice steady but heartbreaking. "She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. She doesn't eat much anymore. She needs her family to help her. But you only came when you wanted something from us." Mom finally found her voice. Emma, sweetie, you don't understand grown-up situations. I understand that when someone you love dies, family is supposed to help," Emma interrupted, and I was amazed by her composure. "Uncle David flew all the way from Denver just to hug me. Daddy's work friends bring us dinner every week. Mrs. Ellen checks on us every day, but you didn't even call to see if I was okay after my daddy died." The adults in that room, people in their 60s and 70s, were being schooled on basic human decency by a child who had just lost her father. And it would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Dad finally set the paper down and looked at me. "Sarah, surely you can't approve of this. This manipulation." "Manipulation!" I stepped forward, feeling a protective fury rise in my chest. "My daughter just told you the truth about your behavior, and you're calling it manipulation? She listed exactly what you failed to provide when we needed you most. How is that manipulation?" "We're your parents," Mom said, tears now flowing freely. "We deserve respect." Emma tilted her head. "Considering this, Daddy always said respect is something you earn, not something you get just because. What did you do to earn it?" "Out of the mouths of babes." Michael had taught her that lesson when she was 6 and complaining about having to listen to a mean substitute teacher. "You show respect to people in authority," he told her, "but you earn deep respect through your actions and how you treat others." Jessica finally spoke up, but her voice lacked its usual bite. "Look, maybe we didn't handle things perfectly, but you can't just cut us out of your life over money." "This isn't about money," I said firmly. "This is about character. This is about who shows up when life gets hard, and you've all shown me exactly who you are." I knelt down to Emma's level. "Are you ready to go home, sweetheart?" She nodded solemnly. "Yes. I want to tell Uncle David about my invoice. I think Daddy would be proud that I stood up to bullies." That word, bullies, hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's exactly what my parents had become. Bullies who were using emotional manipulation and family obligation to try to get money from a grieving widow and child. As we walked toward the door, Dad called out one last time, "Sarah, if you walk out that door, don't expect us to come running when you need help." I turned around one final time. "When have you ever come running when I needed help? You couldn't even come running when my husband died." We left them sitting there in their living room, surrounded by the scattered pieces of their failed money grab and the simple truth an 8-year-old had forced them to face. In the car, Emma was quiet for the first few minutes. Then she asked, "Mom, are we going to be okay without them?" "We're going to be better than okay," I told her. And I meant it. We're going to surround ourselves with people who actually love us, not people who see us as a bank account. When we got home, David was waiting on our front porch. He'd flown in from Denver that morning, having taken time off work specifically to support us through what he knew would be a difficult confrontation. "How did it go?" he asked, embracing both of us. "Aunt Emma was amazing," Emma declared, using the nickname she'd given herself for being brave. I gave them a bill for all the love they didn't give us." David raised an eyebrow at me, and I filled him in on everything that had happened. His expression darkened when I described my parents' formal proposal to take 65% of Michael's life insurance. "That's pure Kevin right there," he said, ruffling Emma's hair when I told him about the invoice. Creative problem solving with just the right amount of well-deserved guilt. That evening, after Emma went to bed, David and I sat in the kitchen drinking tea and talking about next steps. "They'll try again," he warned me. "People like your parents don't give up easily when money is involved." "I know," I said, "but I'm not giving in. Not just because it's wrong, but because it would betray Michael's explicit wishes. He saw this coming and tried to protect us from it." "Have you thought about what this means for your relationship with them going forward?" David asked gently. It was a question I'd been avoiding, but I knew the answer. "I think they've made that decision for me. They've shown me that their love comes with conditions and price tags. That's not the kind of family I want Emma to think is normal." Over the next few days, my parents tried various approaches to reestablish contact. They sent flowers with vague apology cards that spoke of family misunderstandings. They attempted to reach me through mutual friends. Dad even showed up at my workplace, only to be turned away by security when I refused to see him. But I'd made my decision. I blocked their phone numbers and social media accounts. I changed my locks and installed a security camera, not because I thought they'd break in, but because I needed to feel safe in my own home. Emma asked about it only once. "Are we never going to see Grandma and Grandpa again?" "Not unless they can learn to be real grandparents," I told her. "The kind who love you without expecting anything in return." She thought about this seriously. "Like Grandma Diana and Grandpa Robert?" she asked, referring to Michael's parents. "Exactly like Grandma Diana and Grandpa Robert." 3 weeks after our confrontation, I received a letter from my Aunt Carol, Uncle Pete's wife. She wanted me to know that not everyone in the family supported what my parents had done. "We were horrified," she wrote. "We only went to that meeting because they told us it was about planning a memorial scholarship in Michael's name." It helped to know that not everyone thought I was the villain in this story, but it also revealed how my parents had manipulated even their own siblings, using lies to gather support for their scheme. The hardest part wasn't cutting off my parents. It was explaining to Emma why her grandparents weren't in our lives anymore. But kids are remarkably resilient. And Emma seemed to understand that some people aren't capable of the kind of love that doesn't come with strings attached. "I think Daddy would be proud of us for standing up for ourselves," she said one night as I was tucking her into bed. "I think so too, baby. I think he'd be very proud of both of us. Because sometimes protecting the people you love means cutting out the people who are supposed to love you. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart." And Emma and I? We were building a new definition of family, one based on genuine love and support rather than obligation and expectation. It was smaller than what we'd had before, but it was real, and that made all the difference. In the days following our confrontation, word spread through our extended family like wildfire. You know how families work. Someone tells someone who tells someone else, and before you know it, everyone has an opinion about your business. What surprised me was how clearly divided the reactions were. It was like our family had split right down the middle, and people were choosing sides. My Aunt Linda called me the very next day, and I could tell she was uncomfortable. "Sarah, I think you're being unreasonable," she said. "Your parents raised you, put you through college. Don't you think you owe them something?" "I owe them respect for being good parents," I replied. "But they've failed to earn that respect through their actions when I needed them most." She wasn't the only one who sided with my parents. My dad's brother Pete sent me a text saying I was ungrateful and selfish for denying family help in their time of need. Several of my parents' friends from their church reached out, clearly having heard a very one-sided version of events, lecturing me about honoring my father and mother. But what hurt the most was hearing from my cousin Mark, Linda's son, who basically said I should just give my parents some money to keep the peace. The idea that I should compromise my daughter's future just to avoid family conflict was mind-boggling to me. However, not everyone took my parents' side, and some of the support I received surprised me completely. My Aunt Barbara, Uncle Pete's wife, called me about a week after the confrontation. "Sarah, I need you to know that Pete and I had no idea what that meeting was really about," she said. "Your parents told us they wanted to discuss setting up a memorial scholarship in Michael's name. If we'd known they were planning to ambush you for money, we never would have come." That phone call meant more to me than Barbara probably realized. It confirmed what I'd suspected, that my parents had manipulated even their own siblings, using lies to gather support for their scheme. But the most unexpected support came from Jessica's own daughter, my niece, Jennifer. She was 22, working her first job out of college, and apparently had been watching this whole drama unfold with growing disgust. She sent me an email that made me cry. Good tears for once. "Aunt Sarah," she wrote, "I've always seen how differently Grandma and Grandpa treated you compared to Mom. What they did after Uncle Michael died was disgusting. I want you to know that not everyone in this family thinks you're wrong for protecting Emma's future. Mom is being selfish as usual, and I'm ashamed of how our family is acting. Uncle Michael was a good man, and Emma deserves better grandparents than this." Jennifer had grown up seeing the favoritism I'd experienced my whole life, how Jessica got the bigger Christmas presents, how her accomplishments were celebrated while mine were expected, how her mistakes were excused while mine were criticized. Having that validation from someone in the younger generation meant everything to me. Meanwhile, my parents weren't giving up. They started what I can only describe as a campaign to wear me down, using every tactic they could think of to reestablish contact and pressure me into giving them money. First came the flowers. Every few days, a bouquet would arrive at my house with cards that said things like, "Family misunderstandings shouldn't last forever," and "We love you and Emma. Let's work this out." I started refusing the deliveries, but they kept coming for weeks. Then they began reaching out through mutual friends. My old high school friend Amy called me, clearly uncomfortable. "Sarah, your mom asked me to call you. She says you're not returning their calls and they're worried about you and Emma." "Amy," I said gently, "did she tell you what this is actually about?" When I explained the real situation, how they demanded 65% of Michael's life insurance, Amy's tone completely changed. "Oh my God, Sarah, I had no idea. She made it sound like some minor family disagreement. That's horrible." My parents had been telling people we'd had a misunderstanding about family finances, making it sound like a simple disagreement rather than their outrageous demand for my dead husband's money. The most disturbing incident happened about 3 weeks after our confrontation. I was at work. I'd gone back part-time to the architectural firm where I worked as an office manager, partly for the normalcy and partly because I needed something to focus on besides grief. When my boss knocked on my office door, "Sarah, there's a man in the lobby who says he's your father. He's asking to see you, but he seems pretty agitated. Security is keeping an eye on him." My heart started racing. Dad had actually come to my workplace to try to force a conversation. I looked out the window and saw him pacing in the lobby, his face red and determined. "Please tell security to ask him to leave," I said. "I don't want to see him." My boss nodded, understanding immediately that this wasn't a normal family visit. When security approached Dad, I could see him getting more agitated, his voice rising as he demanded to see his daughter. Finally, they escorted him out, and I watched through the window as he stood in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, clearly furious. That evening, he left me a voicemail that was both pathetic and infuriating. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. I'm your father. You can't just refuse to see me. We need to resolve this situation like adults. Call me back." But it was what my mother did next that really crossed the line. The following Tuesday, I got a call from Emma's school principal, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to inform you that your mother came to the school today during pickup time, asking to see Emma. She said there was a family emergency and she needed to take Emma home." My blood ran cold. "Please tell me you didn't let her." "Of course not. We have your authorized pickup list, and she's not on it." But she became quite upset when we refused. She kept insisting she was Emma's grandmother and had every right to see her. We had to ask her to leave the premises. I immediately called the school and added a note to Emma's file that under no circumstances should my parents be allowed contact with her. Then I had to have one of the hardest conversations of my life with my 8-year-old daughter. "Emma, Grandma and Grandpa might try to contact you or pick you up from school," I said carefully. "If that happens, you need to tell a teacher immediately and ask them to call me." Emma looked confused and a little scared. "Are they going to try to take me away?" "No, sweetheart, but they're making some poor choices right now, and I need to keep you safe." It broke my heart that I had to warn my daughter about her own grandparents, but their behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and boundary crossing. The school incident was the final straw. I called Thomas, Michael's lawyer friend, and asked him to send my parents a formal cease and desist letter. "If they continue to harass you or attempt to contact Emma through school, we can pursue a restraining order," he told me. The letter worked, at least temporarily. The flower deliveries stopped. The third-party phone calls ceased. But I knew this was probably just a temporary retreat while they regrouped and figured out their next strategy. What amazed me throughout this whole ordeal was how clearly it revealed people's true characters. The family members who truly cared about Emma and me, like Aunt Barbara and my niece Jennifer, saw through my parents' manipulation immediately. They understood that this wasn't about ingratitude or family obligation. It was about protecting a grieving child's future from greedy relatives. But the relatives who sided with my parents revealed something disturbing about how they viewed family relationships as transactional, based on obligation rather than love. They seemed to believe that because my parents had done the bare minimum of raising me, they were now entitled to profit from my tragedy. David, Michael's brother, put it best when I told him about everything that was happening. "Sarah, toxic people don't just disappear when you set boundaries. They usually escalate first, trying harder to get what they want. But you're doing the right thing. Michael would be proud of how you're protecting Emma." Lying in bed that night, with Emma sleeping peacefully beside me, I realized that while losing my parents' support was painful, it had also freed me from a lifetime of trying to earn love that came with conditions. Emma would grow up understanding that real family, whether biological or chosen, shows up when you need them most, not when they want something from you. The battle wasn't over yet, but I was learning that sometimes the price of peace is worth paying when it means protecting the people who matter most. You know what's amazing about going through a crisis? It shows you who your real family is, and sometimes it's not the people who share your DNA. After cutting ties with my parents, I discovered something beautiful. We weren't alone. In fact, we had more genuine family support than I'd ever realized. 3 months after Michael's death, David made an announcement that brought me to tears. "I'm transferring back to the States," he told me over dinner one evening. The University of Chicago offered me a position in their linguistics department, and I accepted. David, you don't have to uproot your life for us, I protested, though my heart was already soaring at the thought of having him nearby. Yes, I do, he said firmly, then looked at Emma, who was listening intently. I made a promise to your daddy before you were even born. Emma, I promised that if anything ever happened to him, I would take care of you and your mommy. It's easier to keep that promise if I'm in the same city. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. You're going to live here? Like, forever? Like forever, David confirmed, and she launched herself into his arms. Having David nearby changed everything for us. He didn't try to replace Michael. No one could do that. But he brought Michael's presence back into our lives in the most beautiful way. He had the same quirky sense of humor, the same patient way of explaining things, the same unconditional love for Emma that Michael had shown every day. When Emma struggled with a math concept, David would sit with her at the kitchen table for hours, breaking it down just like Michael used to do. When she had nightmares about losing more people she loved, David would reassure her that he wasn't going anywhere. When I had my own dark moments, and there were many, David would show up with takeout and just sit with me, not trying to fix anything, just being present. But David wasn't our only source of support. Michael's parents, Diana and Robert, became the grandparents Emma deserved. They visited every other weekend, called Emma twice a week, and treated me like the daughter they'd never had. The contrast between their behavior and my own parents was stark and healing. Diana would spend entire afternoons with Emma, teaching her to bake Michael's favorite chocolate chip cookies or working on craft projects. Robert took Emma fishing, something Michael had planned to do but never got the chance to. They shared stories about Michael's childhood, keeping his memory alive for Emma in ways that were joyful rather than just sad. You know, Diana told me one day as we watched Emma and Robert building a birdhouse in the backyard, we didn't just lose a son when Michael died. We gained a daughter and granddaughter who needed us. That's how family works. You show up when people need you most. Even Michael's colleagues from Preston and Associates stepped up in ways that amazed me. About 6 months after his death, his office manager, Amanda, called me with incredible news. Sarah, the entire firm has been talking, and we want to do something meaningful in Michael's memory. We've established a college scholarship fund for Emma, the Michael Thompson Educational Fund. Every year until she graduates college, this fund will grow to help cover her expenses. I was speechless. These people who had worked alongside Michael had thought about Emma's future education and decided to invest in it. They understood that Michael would have wanted his daughter to have every opportunity, and they were making sure that happened. Michael talked about Emma's education constantly, Amanda continued. He had spreadsheets planning for her college costs from the time she was 3 years old. We want to honor that dedication. The scholarship fund wasn't just about money, though it was incredibly generous. It was about a community of people who had loved Michael, choosing to love his daughter too. Every contribution was accompanied by a note sharing a memory of Michael or expressing hopes for Emma's future. But perhaps the most healing thing for me was when I decided to channel my own grief into something meaningful. About a year after Michael's death, I established the Michael Thompson Financial Literacy Foundation, using a portion of his life insurance money, the money my parents had tried to claim. I created a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing financial education to underserved communities. Michael had been passionate about financial literacy. He'd volunteered on weekends teaching basic budgeting and investment principles to young families, and he'd always dreamed of expanding that work. Starting the foundation felt like continuing his mission while honoring his memory. The first workshop we held was in a community center on the south side of Chicago. 23 families showed up to learn about budgeting, saving, and planning for their children's futures. As I watched parents taking notes and asking questions about college savings plans, I felt Michael's presence so strongly it took my breath away. "This is what he would have wanted," David said, helping me pack up materials after that first workshop. He always said that financial education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and creating generational wealth. Running the foundation became more than just a way to honor Michael. It became my purpose. Every family we helped, every person who learned to budget or started their first savings account, every child whose college fund was started because of our workshops, they all became part of Michael's legacy. Emma loved coming to the workshops with me on weekends. She'd help set up chairs and hand out materials, proud to be part of Daddy's foundation. Sometimes people would ask her about her father, and she'd tell them with such pride about how he'd taught her about the difference between needs and wants, how he'd helped her start her own savings account when she was 6. One Saturday, after a particularly successful workshop, Emma and I were driving home when she said something that made me pull over because I was crying too hard to see the road. "Mommy, I think Daddy would be happy about what we're doing with his money. We're helping families like Grandma and Grandpa Diana and Robert help us." She was right. We were using Michael's financial legacy to create the kind of support system he would have wanted for other families. We were choosing to build something beautiful from our loss rather than letting it destroy us. The foundation also connected us with other widows and single parents who understood our journey. I met women who had lost husbands to cancer, car accidents, military service, each with their own story of rebuilding life after devastating loss. We formed an informal support group that met monthly, sharing resources and encouragement. Through these connections, I learned that my parents' behavior, while shocking to me, wasn't entirely uncommon. Several women shared stories of family members who had tried to profit from their tragedies, in-laws fighting over inheritance, relatives expecting financial support after a spouse's death, siblings who disappeared when help was needed but reappeared when money was involved. Family vultures, one woman called them. They circle when they smell money. But I also heard beautiful stories of chosen family, friends who became sisters, neighbors who became grandparents, communities that rallied around those in need. These women taught me that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who show up consistently with love and support. 2 years after Michael's death, our life looked completely different than I'd expected, but it was beautiful in its own way. Emma was thriving in school, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. David had become her beloved uncle, the male role model she needed. Diana and Robert were her doting grandparents who never missed a soccer game or school concert. The foundation was growing. Having helped over 200 families with financial education and planning, we'd expanded to offer workshops in Spanish and were partnering with local schools to teach financial literacy to teenagers. And me? I was healing. The sharp, constant pain of grief had softened into something more manageable, a sadness that could coexist with joy, gratitude, and hope for the future. Most importantly, Emma was learning what real family looked like. She was growing up surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, who showed up when she needed them, who invested in her future without expecting anything in return. That's Michael's true legacy, not the money he left behind, but the values he instilled and the love he shared that continues to ripple outward through all the lives we touch. 3 months after that devastating confrontation at my parents' house, something unexpected happened. I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through mail when I saw an envelope with my father's handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away. I'd been doing so well without their drama in my life. But something about this letter felt different. The envelope was plain white, not his usual business stationery. The handwriting looked less confident, more uncertain. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Dear Sarah and Emma," it began, and immediately I could tell this wasn't like their previous attempts at contact. No manipulation, no justifications, no demands. "We've spent these past months reflecting on our behavior and the pain we caused you during an already unbearable time of loss. There are no excuses for what we did. We allowed greed and self-interest to override our love and responsibility as parents and grandparents. We failed you both, and we failed Michael's memory." I had to stop reading for a moment. In all my years of knowing my parents, I'd never heard them take full responsibility for anything without making excuses or shifting blame. The letter continued, "We understand if you never want to see us again. We understand if you can't forgive us, but we wanted you to know that we're getting help. We've started seeing a family counselor to understand how we became the kind of people who would see our daughter's tragedy as our opportunity. We're learning about boundaries, about unconditional love, about what it really means to be family." They didn't ask for anything. They didn't request a meeting or demand forgiveness. They simply acknowledged the harm they'd caused and expressed hope that someday, maybe, they might have the chance to prove they could change. I read that letter probably 10 times, looking for hidden manipulation or conditions. But I couldn't find any. For the first time in my adult life, my parents seemed to be taking genuine accountability for their actions. Emma's 9th birthday was approaching, and I was planning a small celebration with David, Diana, Robert, and a few of her school friends. The day before her party, another letter arrived. This one came with a small package. "Dear Emma," it read in my mother's careful handwriting. "We know we haven't been the grandparents you deserved, especially when you needed us most. We don't expect forgiveness, but we wanted you to know we're thinking of you on your special day. We remember how much you love astronomy." Way inside the package was a beginner's telescope, not the pink princess toys they'd given her in the past, but something that actually aligned with her interests. It was thoughtful in a way that surprised me, suggesting they'd actually been paying attention to who Emma was rather than who they thought she should be. Emma examined the telescope carefully. "It's from Grandma and Grandpa," I explained, watching her face for a reaction. "They remembered I like stars," she said quietly. Then, with that wisdom that continued to amaze me, "Do you think they're really sorry, Mom?" I sat down beside her. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people say they're sorry but don't really change. But sometimes they do the hard work to become better people." "Should we give them a chance?" she asked. The question I'd been avoiding for months. "What do you think we should do?" Emma considered this seriously. "Daddy always said people deserve second chances if they're really trying to change. Maybe we could see them for just a little bit, somewhere public, like when we meet new friends at the playground." Her suggestion was wise beyond her years. Public, controlled, time-limited, exactly the kind of boundary setting I'd been learning about in my grief counseling. I called my mother the next day. "Emma would like to see you for her birthday," I said without preamble. 30 minutes at Morrison's ice cream shop on Saturday at 2 p.m. Emma and I will be there from 2 to 2:30. You're welcome to join us, but this isn't a negotiation about anything else." "Of course," Mom said immediately. "Thank you. Sarah, thank you for this chance." Saturday afternoon. Emma and I were already seated with our ice cream when my parents walked in. They looked older, somehow smaller than I remembered. Dad's usual confident stride was replaced by uncertain steps, and Mom's carefully composed expression had given way to genuine nervousness. They approached our table cautiously. "Hi, Emma," Mom said softly. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, Grandpa. Thank you for the telescope." They sat down across from us, and for the first time in my memory, they focused entirely on Emma. They asked appropriate questions about school, about her friends, about her favorite subjects. They listened when she talked about her science project on the solar system. They didn't mention money, the past conflict, or make any demands. Most surprisingly, they didn't try to guilt-trip me or push for extended contact. When our 30 minutes were up, Dad simply said, "Thank you for letting us see you. Emma, you've grown so much." "Could we maybe do this again sometime?" Mom asked quietly, the entitlement completely gone from her voice. "We'll see," I replied. But for the first time, I didn't automatically feel anger toward them. Over the next several months, we had occasional brief meetings like this, always in public, always time-limited, always focused on Emma. Slowly, I began to see genuine changes in their behavior. The biggest revelation came about 6 months later when Mom called me, not to ask for anything, but to share something vulnerable. "Sarah, I need you to know that your father and I have been attending family therapy for the past 4 months. Dr. Patterson has helped us understand some very uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationship with you and Jessica." She paused, and I could hear her struggling with what to say next. "We've been confronting the fact that we've always favored Jessica, and we're learning how much damage that favoritism caused. We're also working on understanding why we became so entitled and selfish when Michael died. Dr. Patterson says that grief sometimes brings out people's worst impulses if they haven't dealt with their own issues." It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my mother. "We can't undo the damage we caused," she continued, "but we're committed to becoming better people. Not because we expect you to forgive us, but because it's the right thing to do." The real test came on the first anniversary of Michael's death. I'd planned a memorial gathering in our backyard, not a somber, funeral-like event, but a celebration of Michael's life with his favorite barbecue food and music. David helped me organize it, and we invited everyone who had been genuinely supportive during our darkest time. I debated whether to invite my parents. It felt like a significant test of whether their changes were real and lasting. When they arrived, they brought a photo album I'd never seen before, pictures of Michael at family gatherings over the years, moments I'd forgotten they'd captured. They stayed in the background, not making the day about themselves or their relationship with me, but simply honoring Michael's memory alongside everyone else who had loved him. After most of the guests had left, Mom approached me hesitantly. "Sarah, we brought something else." She handed me a folder. "These are copies of the therapy sessions we've attended, the assignments Dr. Patterson has given us, the work we've been doing to understand our behavior. We thought you might want to see that we're serious about changing." I was stunned. They were showing me their therapy homework, their most vulnerable moments of self-reflection, as proof of their commitment to growth. That night, after Emma was asleep, I read through their therapy materials. I saw written exercises where they'd analyzed their favoritism toward Jessica, where they'd explored their feelings of entitlement, where they'd worked through their grief over potentially losing their relationship with Emma and me. It was clear they weren't just going through the motions. They were doing genuine, difficult work to become better people. The process of rebuilding our relationship was slow and careful. There were still awkward moments, times when old patterns would surface briefly before being corrected. But consistently, over months and then years, they showed respect for boundaries, genuine interest in Emma's well-being, and accountability for their past behavior. The parents who emerged from this process weren't the same people who had demanded money at Michael's funeral reception. They were humbler, more self-aware, and finally capable of the unconditional love that grandparents should provide. It taught me something powerful about forgiveness and growth. Sometimes people really can change, but only if they're willing to do the hard work of confronting their own flaws and taking genuine responsibility for the harm they've caused. Not everyone deserves a second chance, but for those who are willing to truly change, reconciliation can be one of the most healing experiences of all. Just when I thought our family's story of reconciliation was complete, I got a text message that completely caught me off guard. It was from Jessica, and it wasn't her usual demanding or dismissive tone. It simply said, "Sarah, could we meet for coffee? I have some things I need to say to you. I understand if you don't want to, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance." This was nearly a year after our parents had started their genuine efforts to change. And honestly, I hadn't expected to hear from Jessica at all. She'd been radio silent through most of my parents' transformation process, and I'd assumed she was still angry about not getting her share of Michael's money. But something about the humility in her message made me curious. Maybe seeing our parents actually take accountability had affected her, too. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory where neither of us would feel trapped. When Jessica walked in, she looked different, less polished, more uncertain. The confidence that had always seemed to radiate from her was replaced by something I'd never seen before: vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting down across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I figured if Mom and Dad can change, maybe there's hope for all of us." Jessica nodded, staring down at her coffee cup for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears I'd never seen before. "Sarah, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. I've been jealous of you my entire life." I blinked, completely taken aback. "Jealous of me? Jessica, you were always the favorite. You got everything you wanted." "That's exactly why I was jealous," she said, shaking her head. "You were always the smart one, the responsible one, the one who actually earned people's respect. I got things handed to me, but I never felt like I deserved them. You achieved everything through your own merit, and I resented that because it highlighted how little I'd actually accomplished." This conversation was surreal. For 30-plus years, I'd felt like the overlooked daughter while Jessica basked in our parents' favoritism. To hear her say she'd envied me was mind-boggling. "When Michael died and left you financially secure," she continued, "it amplified every insecurity I'd ever had. Here you were, the widow who'd lost the love of her life, and you still had more stability and purpose than I did. It was easier to be angry about the money than to face the fact that you'd built a beautiful life while I was still figuring out who I was at 40 years old." I sat there processing this revelation, all those years of feeling less than, and Jessica had been struggling with her own feelings of inadequacy. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Jessica wiped her eyes with a napkin. "Because watching Mom and Dad go through therapy made me realize how toxic our family dynamic has been. I started seeing a counselor, too, trying to understand why I became the kind of person who would get angry at her sister for protecting her child's future." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this for you, but I wanted to say it out loud first. I'm sorry. Sarah, I'm sorry for not supporting you when Michael died. I'm sorry for being selfish about the money. I'm sorry for 30 years of competing with you instead of just being your sister." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't manipulation or a strategy to get something from me. This was genuine remorse from someone who had finally looked in the mirror and didn't like what she saw. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she said. "I know I have to earn that. But I want you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person. Not because I expect anything from you, but because Emma deserves an aunt who adds value to her life instead of creating drama." We talked for 2 hours that day. Jessica told me about her struggles with purpose and identity, how she'd always felt pressure to be the fun daughter while I was the responsible one. I shared some of my own experiences of feeling overlooked and undervalued growing up. For the first time in our adult lives, we were having an honest conversation about our relationship instead of competing or keeping score. "There's something else," Jessica said as we were preparing to leave. "I've been thinking about Emma a lot. She's going to grow up knowing that her aunt initially responded to her father's death by demanding money. That's not the legacy I want with her." She handed me the letter she'd written. "Would you consider letting me be part of her life? Not in any big way. Just, I want her to know she has an aunt who genuinely cares about her well-being." Over the following months, Jessica proved her sincerity through consistent small actions. She sent Emma thoughtful birthday gifts that showed she'd been paying attention to her interests. She offered to help with Emma's school fundraisers. She never once mentioned money or made demands on my time. Most importantly, she supported our parents' continued growth instead of trying to undermine it. When Dad occasionally slipped back into old patterns of entitlement, Jessica would gently call him out on it. When Mom worried that I might cut them off again, Jessica reassured her that consistency and respect were the keys to rebuilding trust. 2 years after that first coffee meeting, Jessica and I had developed something we'd never had before. A genuine sister relationship, not built on childhood dynamics or parental favoritism, but on mutual respect and shared commitment to being better people. This entire experience taught me something profound about what family really means. The family I was born into had to completely transform themselves to become worthy of that title. Meanwhile, the family I'd chosen, David, Diana, Robert, Michael's colleagues, our foundation community, had shown up with unconditional love from the very beginning. Family isn't about DNA or obligation. It's about who shows up when you're broken, who invests in your well-being without expecting anything in return, who celebrates your joys and supports you through your sorrows. Michael's death revealed exactly who belonged in our lives and who didn't. Some people failed that test spectacularly, while others passed with flying colors. And amazingly, some people who initially failed were willing to do the hard work to earn a second chance. Emma is now 11 years old, thriving in school, surrounded by people who genuinely love her. She has her Uncle David, who teaches her chess and helps with science projects. She has Grandma Diana and Grandpa Robert, who never miss a soccer game. She has her slowly rebuilding relationships with my parents, who are finally learning to be real grandparents. And she has Aunt Jessica, who's becoming someone Emma can actually look up to. But most importantly, Emma has learned what unconditional love looks like. She's growing up understanding that real family means people who love you not because they have to, but because they choose to. People who show up consistently, who protect your interests, who invest in your future without expecting anything in return. That's Michael's true legacy, not the financial security he provided, but the values he instilled and the understanding that love should never come with conditions or price tags. If you're watching this and you've experienced family betrayal during your own dark times, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the people who should love us most fail us spectacularly. But that doesn't mean you're unworthy of love. It means they're unworthy of you. Protect yourself. Set boundaries. Choose your family based on their actions, not their titles. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from toxic relationships, even if they're blood relatives. Your worth isn't determined by how your family treats you. Your value isn't measured by their ability to show up. You deserve people in your life who see your pain and want to help heal it, not profit from it. Real family shows up when everything falls apart. Real family protects the vulnerable. Real family puts love before money, always. That's the lesson Emma is learning. And it's the lesson I want to leave with all of you. Family is defined by love and respect, not by blood. Choose wisely, and don't be afraid to build the family you deserve. As I sit here today, 3 years after losing Michael and 2 years after that devastating family confrontation, I want to share with you what I've learned about loss, family, and the courage it takes to protect the people you love most. Michael's life insurance money is still sitting exactly where he intended it to be, in accounts designated for Emma's future and our security. Not a single dollar went to my parents' retirement or Jessica's struggles as an artist. And you know what? That money has grown over these 3 years, compounding interest that will help fund Emma's college education and give her choices Michael dreamed of providing. But that's not Michael's real legacy. His true legacy lives in the values he instilled in both of us and the courage he gave us to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Emma is now 11 years old, and she's become this incredible combination of kindness and strength that takes my breath away. Just last week, she was telling me about a situation at school where some kids were being mean to a new student who didn't speak English very well. Instead of just feeling bad for him, Emma organized a group of classmates to include him in their lunch table and help him with his homework. "Mom," she told me, "Daddy always said that being kind doesn't mean being weak. It means being strong enough to help people who need it." That's Michael right there, teaching his daughter through the values he lived by that you can be gentle and powerful at the same time. When Emma was working on a school project about family heroes last month, she chose to write about her dad. But here's what amazed me. She didn't just write about how much she missed him or how sad she was that he died. She wrote about how he taught her to stand up to bullies, including family members who don't act like real family should. "My dad showed me that protecting the people you love isn't mean," she wrote. "It's what love looks like when someone tries to hurt your family." This child gets it in a way that took me decades to understand. She knows the difference between being respectful and being a doormat. She understands that love shouldn't come with conditions or price tags. She's learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no to people who are trying to take advantage of your kindness. And that brings me to why I wanted to share this story with all of you. If you're watching this video, chances are you've experienced some form of family betrayal or manipulation in your own life. Maybe you've had relatives who only show up when they need something. Maybe you've dealt with family members who see your success or your tragedy as their opportunity. Maybe you've been made to feel guilty for setting boundaries with people who share your DNA but don't share your values. I want you to know that you're not alone, and you're not wrong for protecting yourself and the people who depend on you. Over the past 3 years, I've connected with so many people through our foundation and through sharing pieces of our story. And I've learned that family financial manipulation is far more common than most people realize. I've met women whose in-laws fought over inheritance while they were still grieving. I've talked to men whose siblings expected them to fund everyone else's poor financial decisions. I've counseled parents whose own children tried to manipulate them out of retirement savings. The common thread in all these stories? The manipulators always use the same tactics: guilt about family obligation, reminders of past help or support, and the suggestion that protecting your resources is somehow selfish or ungrateful. But here's what I want you to understand. Protecting yourself and your family's future isn't selfish. It's responsible. It's loving. It's exactly what any good parent or spouse would do. Michael worked his entire adult life to make sure Emma and I would be secure if something happened to him. He made careful financial plans. He bought life insurance. He set up trusts, all because he loved us enough to protect our future, even if he couldn't be here to provide for it himself. When my parents demanded 65% of that security, they weren't asking for family help. They were asking me to betray Michael's love and sacrifice. They were asking me to compromise Emma's future to fund their poor financial choices. Standing up to them wasn't mean or disrespectful. It was honoring my husband's wishes and protecting my daughter's inheritance. It was choosing my real family, the one Michael and I had built together, over people who only wanted to be family when there was something in it for them. The fact that my parents and Jessica eventually did the work to become better people doesn't change the fact that my original decision was right. Their growth happened because I held firm boundaries, not to spite them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. Our family looks different now than it did 3 years ago. We have my parents back in our lives, but on completely different terms based on mutual respect rather than obligation. We have Jessica as a genuine aunt to Emma rather than a competitor for resources. We have David as the uncle who stepped up when Emma needed male guidance. We have Diana and Robert as the grandparents who never wavered in their love and support. But most importantly, Emma and I have each other, and we have the unshakable knowledge that we stood up for what was right when it mattered most. If my story resonates with you, if you've faced similar challenges with family members who mistake your kindness for weakness, I hope you'll share your experience in the comments below. There's so much power in knowing we're not alone in these struggles. And if you're currently dealing with family members who are pressuring you to compromise your boundaries or your security, remember this: you don't owe anyone access to your resources just because you share DNA. Family is defined by love and respect, not by blood and obligation. Hit that like button if this story helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more about our journey and the foundation work we're doing to help other families build financial security and healthy boundaries. Remember, the people who truly love you will want you to protect yourself and your children. The people who get angry when you set boundaries are usually the people you most need to set boundaries with. Thank you for listening to our story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who understand that sometimes love means saying no, and that protecting your family's future is never something you should apologize for. Michael's legacy lives on not just in the security he provided, but in the courage he taught us to use it wisely. That's a lesson I hope Emma carries with her for the rest of her life, and it's a lesson I hope all of you will remember too. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your real families, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for being strong enough to protect what matters most.